The restaurant fell silent. Every head turned toward table 7, where a waiter stood tall, his voice steady but firm as he addressed the woman in the designer suit. "Shout at me again," he said quietly, "and this ends." No one moved. No one breathed. What happened next would change both their lives forever. If you're moved by stories of dignity, respect, and unexpected connections, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful human moments that remind us what truly matters in life. James Morgan wiped his brow with the back of his hand as he balanced 3 plates along his arm. 6 hours into his double shift at Bellini's, an upscale Italian restaurant in downtown Chicago, and his feet were already screaming. But he couldn't afford to slow down. Not with Lily's school tuition due next week and the rent increase notice sitting unopened on his kitchen counter. "Order up for table 7, called Marco from the kitchen. James nodded, quickly delivering his current orders before heading back to collect the new one. Table 7. The corner booth with the business meeting that had been going on for over 2 hours. For executives in tailored suits, laptops open, documents spread across the table, and barely touched appetizers growing cold. As he approached with their main courses, he could feel the tension before he even reached the table. The woman at the head of the table, clearly the one in charge, was speaking in clipped, harsh tones to her colleagues. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her expression cold as winter steel. "I don't care what the projections say, Peterson. We promised the board 15% growth this quarter, and I won't accept excuses." James carefully set down the first plate. "Pappardelle with wild mushrooms?" The woman barely glanced up, pointing impatiently at the man to her right. James placed the dish down and continued serving, trying to be invisible as the conversation continued. "Ms. Winters, if we push too hard on the Singapore deal," began a nervous-looking man with glasses. "That's exactly the kind of weak thinking that loses companies' market share," she cut him off. "Ambrose Tech didn't get to where it is by playing it safe." James placed the last dish, her seared scallops, in front of her. "Can I get you anything else at the moment?" She waved him away without looking up. James retreated, used to the dismissive treatment from certain customers. In his 3 years at Bellini's, he'd learned to let it roll off his back. The tips from these corporate dinners helped pay for Lily's asthma medication. Lily. His heart squeezed at the thought of his 8-year-old daughter, probably finishing her homework at Mrs. Grayson's apartment downstairs. The elderly neighbor had been a godsend since Melissa's death 2 years ago, watching Lily when James's shifts ran late. He checked his watch, 3 more hours until he could go home and tuck his little girl into bed. The next time James approached table 7, the tension had escalated. The woman, Ms. Winters, he'd heard them call her, was berating one of her employees, her voice rising with each word. "This is completely unacceptable. I asked for these numbers last week. Last week." She slammed her hand on the table, causing the water glasses to jump. "Do you have any idea what's at stake here?" James refilled their water glasses quietly, trying not to draw attention. The young man being dressed down looked close to tears, his face flushed with humiliation. "I'm sorry, Ms. Winters. The data team had some unexpected. I don't want excuses, I want results." Her voice had risen enough that nearby tables were glancing over. "This is exactly why we're losing ground to Microsphere. Because of incompetence like this." James finished with the water and was about to step away when she snapped her fingers at him without looking up. We need more bread." "Right away, ma'am," James replied, turning toward the kitchen. "And these scallops are overcooked. Take them back." James paused, looking at her barely touched plate. "I'm sorry to hear that. I'll have the kitchen prepare a new order immediately." As he reached for her plate, she finally looked up at him, her eyes sharp with irritation. "And tell your chef that if he can't properly cook a simple scallop, perhaps he should consider another profession." James felt a flash of protectiveness for Marco, who had been nothing but kind to him, especially when he'd needed extra shifts after Melissa died. "I'll let the kitchen know your concerns," he said neutrally. He was halfway to the kitchen when he heard her voice rise again, this time directed at another colleague. By the time he returned with fresh bread, the atmosphere at the table had grown even more strained. The executives looked miserable, tapping on their laptops and avoiding eye contact with their boss as she continued her tirade. "These projections are garbage. Absolute garbage." She pushed away a document in disgust. "I'm surrounded by mediocrity." James set down the bread basket and the fresh plate of scallops. "Is there anything else I can?" "This wine is warm," she interrupted, pointing to her glass of Chardonnay. "Don't you people know how to properly chill a white?" "I apologize." "I'll bring you a fresh glass," James said, reaching for her glass. "Don't bother. Just bring the whole bottle on ice. And be quick about it." She turned back to her colleagues without waiting for his response. When James returned with the wine, the woman was on her phone, her voice sharp as she apparently dressed down someone else who wasn't even present. The other executives were eating in uncomfortable silence. James quietly placed the ice bucket on the table and began to reach for her glass to pour. "Not now," she snapped, covering her phone briefly. "Can't you see I'm in the middle of something important?" James stepped back, nodding politely. "Of course. I'll return in a moment." As he walked away, he heard her voice rise again. "No, you listen to me. I don't care if it's midnight in Tokyo. This deal needs to happen now." Throughout the next hour, James watched the dynamic at table 7 with growing discomfort. The woman, who he'd overheard was Alexandra Winters, CEO of Ambrose Technology, continued to berate her team, her voice occasionally rising loud enough to disturb the other diners. Each time James approached the table, her treatment of him grew more dismissive. When he brought their dessert menus, she barely acknowledged him, waving away his explanation of the specials. "Just bring me an espresso. Double shot." "Of course." "And for the rest of the table?" Before her colleagues could answer, she cut in. "They don't need dessert. We have work to finish." The discomfort on their faces was evident, but no one contradicted her. James nodded and turned to leave when she called after him. "And make sure it's actually hot this time. The last one was barely warm." James paused, certain that the espresso he'd served earlier had been steaming when it left the kitchen. "Yes, ma'am. Right away." When he returned with her espresso, she was once again berating the young man with glasses, who looked close to his breaking point. "Peterson, these numbers are still wrong. Are you being deliberately incompetent, or does it just come naturally to you?" James set down the espresso carefully. The young executive's hands were trembling as he tried to adjust something on his laptop. "I'm sorry, Ms. Winters. I'll recalculate them right away." "See that you do. And this time, try not to embarrass yourself." She turned to James with barely a glance. "Is that the espresso?" Finally. She took a sip and immediately grimaced. "This is bitter. Take it back." James knew Marco had prepared it perfectly, he always did. "I apologize. Would you prefer something else instead?" "What I would prefer," she said, her voice rising, "is competent service." "Is that too much to ask in a restaurant of this supposed caliber?" The nearby tables had gone quiet. James felt a flush of embarrassment creep up his neck, but he maintained his professional demeanor. "I'll bring you another espresso right away." As he turned to leave, she called after him, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "And tell whoever made this that they should consider a career change. Maybe fast food would be more their speed." James stopped. Something inside him shifted. He thought of Marco in the kitchen, who had given him time off when Lily had been hospitalized with a severe asthma attack last winter. He thought of his daughter, who he was teaching to treat everyone with respect, regardless of their job or status. He thought of the trembling young executive at the table, being humiliated in public. Slowly, he turned back. The restaurant had grown unusually quiet, as if everyone sensed something was about to happen. "Is there a problem?" Alexandra Winters asked, her eyebrow raised in challenge. James took a deep breath. "Yes, ma'am, there is." His voice was quiet but clear. "I understand you're having a stressful evening, but I need to ask you to speak to me and my colleagues with respect." Her eyes widened in shock, then narrowed dangerously. "Excuse me? The chef who prepared your espresso has been cooking for 20 years. He takes pride in his work. As do I." James maintained eye contact, his voice steady. "We're happy to serve you, but not to be spoken to as if we're beneath you." The silence in the restaurant was absolute now. Alexandra's face flushed with anger. "How dare you speak to me that way? Do you have any idea who I am?" "Yes, Ms. Winters. You're a customer in this restaurant, just like everyone else." James kept his voice level. "And like everyone else, you're expected to treat the staff with basic courtesy." She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I want to speak to your manager. Now." "Of course. I'll get him for you." James nodded calmly. "But before I do, I want to be clear, shout at me again, and this ends. I'll walk away from this table and ask another server to take over." The executives at the table stared in shock. Alexandra Winters looked as if she'd been slapped. "You can't speak to me that way. I could buy and sell this entire restaurant." "Perhaps," James acknowledged. "But in here, we're just people serving other people. That's all." For a moment, no one moved. Then, unexpectedly, one of the executives, a woman with kind eyes who had seemed uncomfortable throughout the evening, began to applaud. Slowly, others in the restaurant joined in, a ripple of approval spreading through the dining room. Alexandra Winters stood frozen, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. For the first time that evening, she seemed at a loss for words. James nodded politely. "I'll get my manager now, if you still wish to speak with him." As he turned to walk away, he heard her voice behind him, quieter now. "Wait." He paused, turning back. Alexandra slowly sat down, her posture less rigid than before. "That won't be necessary." The applause had died down, but the atmosphere in the restaurant had shifted. James waited, unsure what would happen next. Alexandra cleared her throat. "I apologize for my behavior." It was the last thing anyone expected to hear. Her colleagues looked at her in astonishment. "Thank you," James said simply. "Would you still like another espresso?" She shook her head. "No. This one is fine." She took a sip as if to prove it, then added, "Please extend my apologies to the chef as well." James nodded. "I will." As he walked away, he could feel his heart pounding in his chest. He had never done anything like that before. In the kitchen, Marco looked at him with concern. "Everything okay out there?" It got very quiet. James managed a smile. "It's fine. Just a misunderstanding that's been cleared up." When he returned to check on table 7 a while later, the atmosphere had changed dramatically. The conversation was quieter, more collaborative. Alexandra Winters was actually listening to her team, nodding as the young man with glasses explained something on his laptop. As James cleared their plates, Alexandra looked up at him. "May I ask your name?" "James. James Morgan." She nodded, studying him with new interest. "James. How long have you worked here?" 3 years. "Do you enjoy it?" The question surprised him. "Most days. It pays the bills." She seemed to be considering something. "You have remarkable presence." The way you handled that situation. Not many people speak to me that way. Perhaps more should, he said, then immediately regretted his boldness. To his surprise, she laughed, a genuine sound that transformed her face. Perhaps you're right. When it came time for the check, Alexandra insisted on paying despite her colleagues' offers. As James brought the credit card slip for her signature, she looked up at him again. Do you have a business card, James? He shook his head. No, ma'am. Waiters don't typically carry those. She nodded, then wrote something on a napkin and handed it to him along with a generous tip. My direct number. If you're ever interested in a change of career, call me. Ambrose Tech could use someone with your integrity. James took the napkin, surprised. Thank you, but I'm not sure I'm qualified for corporate work. You'd be surprised what qualities I value most. She stood, gathering her things. Sometimes it's not about degrees or experience. It's about character. As they prepared to leave, the young executive with glasses approached James separately. Thank you, he said quietly. No one's ever stood up to her like that. It was impressive. James nodded, uncomfortable with the attention. Just doing my job. Well, it made a difference. Not just for us, but for her too, I think. After they left, James finished his shift in a daze. Had he really stood up to a CEO? Would he still have a job tomorrow? As he hung up his apron, Marco clapped him on the shoulder. I heard what happened. Gutsy move, amigo. James shrugged. Probably stupid. No. Necessary. Marco squeezed his shoulder. Some people need reminding that we're all human. That night, as James tucked Lily into bed, his daughter looked up at him with curious eyes. Did you have a good day at work, Daddy? He smiled, brushing her hair back from her forehead. An interesting one. Did you help people? You always say that's the important part of any job. James thought about the change in Alexandra Winter's demeanor, the relief on her employees' faces, the quiet thank you from the young executive. I think maybe I did, sweetheart. In an unexpected way. He placed the napkin with Alexandra's number on his bedside table that night, uncertain what to do with it. His life was here, with Lily, with the routine they'd built since Melissa died. The thought of corporate work seemed foreign, intimidating. But as he drifted off to sleep, he couldn't help wondering if perhaps there was something more waiting for him, a new challenge, a new beginning. 3 days later, James was working the lunch shift when the hostess approached him nervously. James? There's someone asking for you specifically. He looked up from setting a table to see Alexandra Winters standing in the entrance, dressed more casually than before in slacks and a simple blouse, though still unmistakably elegant. Ms. Winters, he said, approaching her with surprise. Are you here for lunch? She shook her head. No. I came to see you, actually. You didn't call. He hesitated. I wasn't sure what to say. She nodded, understanding. May I have a moment of your time? I promise not to shout. The hint of a smile softened her features. They sat at an empty table in the corner. Alexandra seemed different, less severe, more present. I've been thinking about our interaction, she began. It's been a long time since anyone spoke to me with such honesty. James shifted uncomfortably. I apologize if I overstepped. Don't apologize. It was refreshing. And necessary. She leaned forward slightly. It made me realize something important about the culture I've created at Ambrose. About the person I've become. James listened, surprised by her candor. Success came early for me, she continued. I founded Ambrose Tech when I was 26. By 30, we were a major player in the industry. Somewhere along the way, I started to believe that results justified any means. That people were tools to achieve goals. That sounds lonely, James said quietly. She looked startled, then thoughtful. Yes. I suppose it is. She straightened her shoulders. But that's not why I'm here. I meant what I said about offering you a position. I'm flattered, but... Before you decline, hear me out. She held up a hand. I've done some research on you, James Morgan. His eyebrows rose in surprise. Nothing invasive.